Playland. As always, I am Sir Foul Player of Brooklyn. My brother Mark Nash TV, I see you. Please subscribe to my brother Mark Nash TV if you listen to this now or in the replay. Wanted to get into this video, and this is the first of its kind that I'm doing, in which I'm actually doing like a bit of a watch along of the congressional hearing that happened today. And this congressional hearing was in regards to oversight of the Department of Health and Human Services Office of Human Resettlement. So basically, it's a new, or a different department, Human Resettlement, the Office of Human Resettlement, that is overseen by the Department of Health and Human Services. That's a regular department that's been there for a long time. This committee is discussing a branch within that department that was basically watching or overseeing and keeping track of migrant children that were coming into the country. If you guys haven't heard, there's some statistics regarding how many unaccompanied migrant children that are unaccounted for that have come into the country in the last couple of years. The last number I heard was 370,000. I'm not sure. Maybe in this hearing, somebody mentions a number of 400,000. And to be clear, I've already watched this, even though it streamed about an hour ago, or it finished about a half hour ago, actually. I've already watched this, and it's not riveting, but I want to do these things a little bit more often. It actually is riveting. However, I do watch these things often, and one thing that I'm not going to do for the sake of this video, and because I already watched the whole stream, I'm just not going to listen to the parts where Democrats are grilling the person who's in charge of this Office of Human Resettlement. The reason being is that they filibuster. And filibuster, if you guys don't know, filibusters when somebody beats around the bush and wastes a lot of air and tries not to answer your questions by just talking about nonsense, pretty much. The guy who's being grilled here, I believe, was actually a congressman in the past, but he's now in charge of this department that Biden created that was in charge of resettling migrants. You know, even though we don't have a migrant problem, supposedly, you know, even though they were called asylum seekers, we have a severe migrant problem. And the Biden administration, unless you have blinders on, was gun-ho about allowing mass migration into this nation. That rhymed. The person overseeing the resettlement operation is the person that's being grilled here in this congressional hearing today. However, being that I do watch a lot of these judiciary committees, a lot of times if it's a Democratic witness, what happens with the Democratic members of Congress or on these panels, which they usually have an even number of Democrats and Republicans, what happens is that when the Democrats, they use the same tactic that they always do. They don't attack their own. Like the Democrats, as long as you're working with them, as long as you stay in line, the Democrats will work with you and cover you up. And I'm no dummy. I've seen this many times in other congressional hearings where the answers are like filibustered and whatnot. And I just don't want to waste your time like listening to it because there's nothing of import being said. Basically, what's being said by the Democrats is the same shit across the board, which is, if there's a migration issue happening right now, there was also a migration issue happening under the Trump administration, right? Right? It's basically that and a lot of dick riding, if you will. Like they're basically like making it seem like this guy's doing a fantastic job. But the facts of the matter are, before we even start, and that's the reason I'm not playing the Democrat Congress men and women asking this other Democrat who's in charge of this Department of Human Resettlement. I'm not going to waste my time playing their responses because it's 5 minutes of nothing, basically. And I rather him answer questions in relation to this issue. Another thing is that at no time during this hearing did any Democrat mention the number of kids that are missing and unaccounted for, and kids that have ended up as basically sex slaves in some instances, being raped, being pimped out, being assigned to places that are strip clubs, being put to work in chicken factories. So I don't want to waste my time playing Democrats questioning of another Democrat because they're not asking anything relevant. So I mean, if you want to listen to the Democrat portions on your own and you want to call me out on something that I may have missed, feel free. But I'm not here to waste my own time and yours. And for the purpose of this video, if I play only the Republican questioning, which is the only real questioning that's happening in this congressional hearing, it was going to cut down the time of this hearing dramatically. But the guy who is the chairman of this committee is called Mr. McClintock. I've heard of him. I'm not gonna say I'm up on like most of these dudes like that. I know like Congressman Biggs and a few other people there, but I also will say that not every Republican on this committee is somebody that I ride for. I don't ride for all Republicans. In fact, I hate the Republican Party almost as much as I hate the DNC. The Republicans are useless in the sense that they're just there to be beat by the leftists and then make it seem like, oh, well, the leftists play dirty and there's nothing we could do. Like, no. I hate Republicans almost as much as I hate Democrats. But having said that, though, not every, like, at least every Republican here has to save face and give him a line of questioning rather than a bunch of obfuscating of issues and bringing the conversation to God knows where. So, again, for the purposes of your sanity and to make this video far shorter, I'm only playing the Republican questions with this. I'll stop and give some input here and there, and we'll watch this together. So let's begin.
From this administration of this whole.
This is a video done by Right Side Broadcasting. This is only for educational purposes only. I hope that protects me from any copyright issues, but here we go.
I think we all agree that if a child shows up lost and alone on your doorstep, you've got a moral obligation to find out where that child lives and return them safely home. The last thing any decent person would do is to take that child to a stranger's house and leave them there. Yet it appears this is exactly what this administration has been doing for the last 4 years. In just 4 years, this administration has deliberately allowed 7.6 million illegal aliens to enter the United States, releasing more than 5.7 million illegal aliens into the country, while more than 1.9 million known gotaways evaded apprehension, an illegal population larger than the state of Arizona, our 14th largest state. And among them have been an estimated 530,000 unaccompanied alien minors. That's about the entire population of the state of Wyoming. Instead of protecting these children until they can be returned safely home or until their rightful families can be located, HHS deliberately circumvented protocols designed to protect these children and abandoned them to poorly vetted sponsors in the United States. The House Judiciary Committee estimates that roughly 150,000 of these children have now disappeared. They simply vanished into a dark underworld of sex and drug trafficking, forced labor, gang activity, and crime. Of course, many are not helpless children, but rather teenagers or adults posing as teenagers who themselves present a mortal threat to the public. Take the case of Walter Javier Martinez. He was transferred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement as an unaccompanied alien child, despite a previous arrest in El Salvador for illicit association with MS-13. One called the Salvadorian authorities would have confirmed this. Maryland authorities later noted that he had gang tattoos. Instead, Martinez was released into our country, no questions asked, and on July 27, 2022, he brutally attacked and killed Kyla Hamilton, who was sound asleep in her own bed. While the prime suspect in her murder, Martinez was placed in a foster home with other children and enrolled in a local high school. He has since admitted to 4 murders, 2 rapes, and additional other crimes. For Juan Carlos Garcia Rodriguez from Guatemala, also fast-tracked into our country by this administration as an unaccompanied alien child and released to an unrelated sponsor who was himself an illegal alien. On August 12, 2023, he murdered 11-year-old Maria Gonzalez in her own home, wrapped her body in a trash bag, and stashed it under her bed for her father to find. We don't know how many more such monsters are among the 150,000 unaccompanied alien minors that HHS has lost track of, or how many helpless children have been abducted and exploited. But we are slowly finding out tragedy by preventable tragedy. What we know is that in 2021, Mr. Becerra removed the requirement that ORR provide biographic and biometric data for all adult members of the sponsor's household to check for criminal histories.
Pause that right there. The gentleman that's being grilled and the person who's in charge of this Office of Refugee Resettlement, his name is Becerra. His last name is Becerra. I want to rewind that a few seconds to in this last statement that he made, in which biometric data was required to prove that you were the parent of a minor that you were coming into the country with. So, for instance, if you showed up to the country with a child in tow or accompanied by a child, while you were being detained, they would get DNA tests run to make sure that you were the parent of that child. That has since been waived since 2021, and it's not a requisite any longer.
11-year-old Maria Gonzalez in her own home, wrapped her body in a trash bag, and stashed it under her bed for her father to find. We don't know how many more such monsters are among the 150,000 unaccompanied alien minors that HHS has lost track of, or how many helpless children have been abducted and exploited. But we are slowly finding out tragedy by preventable tragedy. What we know is that in 2021, Mr. Becerra removed the requirement that ORR provide biographic and biometric data for all adult members of the sponsor's household to check for criminal histories. So what could possibly go wrong? Records produced by a whistleblower show that in 2021, HHS disregarded repeated warnings by a case manager about the MS-13 affiliation of one sponsor attempting to take custody of 2 unaccompanied alien children. According to the New York Times, Secretary Becerra berated employees for not processing minors fast enough, saying, quote, "If Henry Ford had seen this in his plant, he would have never become famous and rich. This is not the way you do an assembly line."
See, so they're bringing up the fact that this Secretary Becerra, a Latin man, if that matters, was reportedly telling his employees that the operation that they were running or processing of migrants into the country wasn't done fast enough. Now, again, unless you have blinders on, the migration wave that has happened in this country in the last, since 2021 basically, has gone up so rapidly that everybody, including the liberal New York City media, has no option other than to report it. Same thing with the Chicago liberal media, where in Chicago, Mayor Johnson is the only holdout of mayors that still wants to make Chicago a sanctuary city, in spite of what his voting populace has. Okay, sorry about that, guys. I must have been spitting the real. But you have a mayor like in Chicago, who's the last holdout of all these sanctuary cities, making it seem as though he's the last, in spite of the fact that his constituents don't want the migrants there. It's the biggest news going on in Chicago, similar to how it is one of the biggest news stories that's happening in New York City. Again, New York City and Chicago are both blue cities in blue states, Illinois and New York respectively. So the fact that they're covering this migrant story in a negative tone like they are in New York City shows you that although the liberal media does its best to protect its own, they have no choice but to cover this story because it can't be hidden any longer. Like in a place like Chicago and New York, when you see tons of migrant crime taking place, in addition to the fact that you see tons of migrants in the streets, so you can't really say, "Oh, well, this isn't happening." Um, and I'm gonna tell you, as far as New York City goes, again, I only watch New York City local media for the most part, and you've had for a while in New York City. What up, Deuce Times? Peace, man. In New York City, they were doing everything they could not to report on the migrant crisis. They were trying to make it seem as it was something else. Up until the moment that there were actually migrants like in the streets in mass, because they were being booted out of shelters, and there was really no place to put them for a short while in New York City. It wasn't being covered at all by the local media, really. Up until it got to the point where they were in the street. So then they started covering it as if it was some sort of crisis because they were living in the street. Whereas the crisis that was really happening was the fact that they were letting these motherfuckers in here in mass. That's the crisis. So as far as New York City is concerned, they were trying not to report on this migrant crisis until the point that it got to the time where they were living on the street. From that point on, it went from covering them living on the street to actually being candid and covering instances in which these migrants were doing crime. Again, when they were doing crime before that in New York City, it wasn't being covered like that. They were just reporting it as crime that would happen, but they were being very reluctant to report it as it being migrants that were conducting these crimes in New York City. So in the bluest of blue areas like Chicago and New York, this is the biggest thing popping. So for some people that may not be in tune or act like this isn't happening or act like this isn't a big deal, I mean, maybe this isn't for you necessarily, but I want to talk politics from here on out candidly.
In July 2021, concerned employees drafted a memo warning that, quote, labor trafficking was increasing and complaining that the agency had become, quote, one that rewards individuals for making quick releases and not one that rewards individuals for preventing unsafe releases.
So he's basically calling out the fact that the director of this department, Becerra, was rewarding the people that were processing migrants in faster rather than the ones that were calling out instances where these children were in danger and being released to migrants or criminals.
Become, quote, one that rewards individuals for making quick releases and not one that rewards individuals for preventing unsafe releases. According to press reports, Mr. Becerra told then ORR Director Cindy Huang that, and I quote, if she could not increase the number of discharges, he would find someone who could. Huang resigned a month later. Now, the American people have already passed judgment on these policies in the recent election. But those responsible have much to answer for to the victims of their policies and to history. And we welcome the Secretary here today to account for his actions. With that, I yield to the ranking member for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset,
Again, I'm not going to waste your time and listen to this twat Gia. Not one bit. If you want to go listen to her on your own time, you go ahead. But I don't want to be wasting my time with 5 minutes of dick riding by one Democrat to another. Like, I rather them ask questions. The Democrats, I've heard this hearing in its entirety after it was uploaded. The Democrats in this hearing and in every other hearing that you could think of, when it comes to them interviewing another Democrat, what they do is they try to cover up and they try to change the subject and just make it seem as, oh, well, it's happening under the Trump regime as well. So, Trump's bad. That's it. I don't want to waste your time with that stuff. If you want to go listen to that kind of stuff, listen to this on your own or go listen to MSNBC.
Today to finally answer some of our questions.
This is Jim Jordan.
Finally, 150,000 of them. That's the issue, and that's why we're glad the secretary is here today to finally answer some of our questions. I do appreciate the secretary showing up. I had a chance to serve with the secretary when he's in the Congress. And I appreciate the ranking member. I just disagree with what you had to say. We worked on other issues together, but you know, you can't say, oh, they're not really lost. We just can't contact them. That's the problem. 150,000. And I appreciate the chairman's work and this committee's work. The chairman was the primary driver of HR2 that we passed a year and a half ago that would have solved so many problems with our border and with our immigration system. So I appreciate the work that he's done, and I appreciate this hearing. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Next, please to recognize the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, we don't do Jerry Nadler here, my friends. These are Democrat leftist swamp creatures. I don't want them to play defense for another Democrat. Like I'm not gonna waste my time.
disappointed. Thank you, and I yield back.
Well, now that we've come to a bipartisan agreement on these vital measures, it's time to introduce today's witness. Mr. Javier Becerra is the Secretary of Health and Human Services, a position he's held since March of 2021. Secretary Becerra previously served as the Attorney General of California and was a member of the House of Representatives between 1993 and 2017. We welcome him and thank him for appearing here today.
Yo, Deuce, if you're still there, or any other person from California, I don't know if do you recall this person, Becerra, from his past time in California, as the AG of California?
Begin by swearing you in, Mr. Secretary. Please rise and raise your right hand.
This is the swearing in portion. I mean, like,
Do you
this
swear or
happens-
affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct?
I'll let that rock.
Knowledge, information, and belief so help you God. Thank you. Let the record reflect the witness's answer in the affirmative. Please know your written testimony will be entered in the record in its entirety, and accordingly we ask that you summarize it. So, Mr. Secretary, you may begin.
Mr. Chairman and ranking members, ranking member and the members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to discuss the work of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Unaccompanied Children Bureau within the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Before I begin my comments, I do want to add my words to those of the ranking member who mentioned our former colleague Sheila Jackson Lee.
Yeah, so this is actually a Department of Unaccompanied Minors. I mean, unaccompanied minors, yeah.
A friend, someone I had a chance to serve with.
Make sure I didn't.
For inviting me to discuss the work of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Unaccompanied Children Bureau within the Office of
Yeah,
Refugee
Unaccompanied
Resettlement.
Children Bureau.
Before I begin my comments, I do want to add my words to those of the ranking member who mentioned our former colleague Sheila Jackson Lee, a dear friend, someone I had a chance to serve with for many, many years, and a true champion of people who really just believe in their government and in their Constitution. So we miss her, but it's good to know that we always think of her.
If you're a champion of currently believing in your government and Constitution in 2024, you're a damn fool.
Chairman, let me begin by clarifying some confusion or misunderstanding over ORR's work. First, ORR is not an immigration or law enforcement agency. It does not possess such powers and does not render decisions in those areas. Second, pursuant to congressional mandate, ORR provides temporary custody and care, including support services for unaccompanied children. ORR fulfills its congressional mandate by funding nearly 300 programs in 29 states, including shelter programs, transitional foster care, long-term foster care, group homes, heightened supervision facilities, and residential treatment centers.
I hope that they do additional hearings in the future to find out which are of these agencies that he just mentioned, foster agencies and whatnot, which ones were the ones that were awarded these contracts to do so. Probably a lot of dark money that was funneled and laundered, whatever have you. But these are things that we'll be finding out soon. And I mean, these to me reeks of a human trafficking operation, not because of what I heard in this hearing. What I know and what's happening and what I see in New York City, a lot of these women that are coming are prostitutes. A lot of the kids that are showing up, you don't really see many of them out and about. God knows like where they're at.
These facilities, our contractors deliver child-focused services in accordance with child welfare best practices. That includes access to health care, education, recreation, counseling, and legal services. And third, HHS's custodial responsibility and oversight for unaccompanied children through ORR ends once we place the child with an appropriately vetted sponsor. As important as this work is,
So it basically, the standard is, from what he's saying, is that once the child is placed with God knows who, because the people that are being placed or that are being handed these kids are at times have no relations to the kid and really can't prove that they're anything to the child, as in the examples that are given in this testimony. They bring up a few. But most times it's just given to God knows who, and then they're lost in the system, if you will. He's basically saying, well, our department is only in charge after a while, like wherever they go after that, we have no jurisdiction. So it's basically the Democrat way. Like, it's look over there, not over here, and I have nothing to do with it. Trump's bad.
children through ORR ends once we place the child with an appropriately vetted sponsor. As important as this work is, we know, and child welfare experts will tell you, that the best place for a child is with a family, in a home, in a community, not in a congregate care facility. That's why we work so hard to find and vet potential sponsors for an unaccompanied child. In fact, an overwhelming number of children released to a sponsor by ORR were placed with a parent, legal guardian, or close family member. As any parent will tell you, to really raise a child, you have to be all in. The children we encounter at ORR enter the country without any parent or adult guardian. The challenge for these unaccompanied children is immense. We have worked tirelessly over the past 46 months to build a sustainable network of trained and licensed caregivers who can...
Now, shouldn't there be no unaccompanied minors entering into the country? What they're basically admitting to is the fact that hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied minors are entering into the country, some of which are being lost to the system. Some of them that are being lost, to God knows what. Like, they're just unaccounted for at this current juncture. How is it that a minor crosses several borders through and end up at the United States border? I mean, you guys tell me that. Like, is it a constant caravan of people that are linking hands and going through Guatemala and Ecuador and Chile and whatnot? You know, it's just happening. Oh, these are magical children. Like, they eat a little bit of guacamole and then they get enough power to and logistical know-how to end up in America unaccompanied, according to this fella. No, they're not ending up in this country unaccompanied. They're being brought to the border unaccompanied. Particularly when you have hundreds of thousands. Peace, Bruce Bass. How you doing? Particularly when you have hundreds of thousands that are unaccounted for, according to the person that's running this department, who's a Democrat, the Office of Human Resettlement. Like, why do we have an Office of Human Resettlement in this country? And how is it that we have the need to resettle, or we have the need to all of a sudden have hundreds of thousands of more resettlers, if you will, asylum seekers, if you will, illegal immigrants? How is it that we have that many more now, and in addition to children that are unaccounted for, hundreds of thousands of children that are unaccounted for, according to the people speaking here? Now, again, I'm no expert. These people are experts, according to leftist standards. When they need an expert, or when they want to speak to you normally, they always call, like, well, you're not an expert. So these guys are experts at what they do. This gentleman is in charge of the Office of Human Resettlement, for God's sake. He's not giving any answers in regards to the children that are missing. I mean, even though the statistics are thrown at his face many times that there's hundreds of thousands that are missing. Some of them that are ending in the sex trades, according to the statements that are brought in this panel. We'll continue.
Released to a sponsor by ORR were placed with a parent, legal guardian, or close family member. As any parent will tell you,
Now, the first thing he says is released to
children released to a sponsor by ORR.
a sponsor. And you'll see that in the span of this testimony, that sponsor is a very loose term with this fella here. Anybody could be a sponsor. There's people that like are gang members that have attempted to take 2 children at once, according to some of the statements here. So sponsor could be just about anybody. Sponsor could be some shady ass agency that's run with dark money, which is in charge of kids. And you see tons of little operations that are moving that way in New York City. It's not bus loads of people. These are sometimes minivans with people, minivans full of little children, 1 car with 2 migrants. Like, it's not a something that's being run by just one central office. No, there's these hundreds of non-government organizations and little shady supposed church operations that are doing God knows what with these children. And yes, there are church operations that are in charge of children that are selling them out to the sex trades, that are selling them out to be God knows what with. So we can't just act like, you know, oh, well, these are, well, you know, Christians are conservatives, so like, you know, technically that's on y'all. No, like whoever's in charge of losing these kids, or whoever's in doing bad to these kids, I don't care who they are, they should be eviscerated. They should no longer breed, in my humble opinion. That's just Falplayski's standard. But the fact that hundreds of thousands of them are missing, and with people that defend leftist talking points or Trump haters, whatever have you, this seems to be lost on them. I mean, and I'm hoping it's just something that they may not know. They may not know that hundreds of thousands of children are missing. They may not know that there's people in this world who don't get turned on by the wiles of a man or a woman. There are people in this world who have appetites that you may not even imagine, that are some of the dirtiest, nastiest shit that one can think of. These people do exist. And if these people need to be supplied, and a lot of supply is coming into the country, bad things may happen. We'll continue.
Were placed with a parent, legal guardian, or close family member. As any parent will tell you, to really raise a child, you have to be all in. The children we encounter at ORR enter the country without any parent or adult guardian. The challenge for these unaccompanied children is immense. We have worked tirelessly over the past 46 months to build a sustainable network of trained and licensed caregivers who can meet this challenge. Our network of small-sized caregivers means no child stays in a barrack-style housing. We work to keep tender-age children separate from older adolescents. We strive to house siblings in the same facility together. We expand services so children can receive information and guidance from legal advocates. We expanded care management and sponsor placement operations to 7 days a week. We established the UC Ombuds office so that staff and stakeholders may raise concerns to an independent, impartial body. We established the ORR Integrity and Accountability Team to further identify and prevent fraud. We executed a memorandum of agreement with the Office of Trafficking in Persons, with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and with the Department of Labor to help protect the children after they leave our care and custody. And we extended our access to post-release services to every child we place with a sponsor. Like parenting, the work of ORR and our network of caregivers is nonstop, and we are constantly striving to improve. We set clear rules for standards of care, and we have zero tolerance for behavior by care personnel that threatens the safety and well-being of children. All incidents of inappropriate behavior must be reported to ORR, and we take action as well as report and coordinate with appropriate authorities. These are the trademarks of an enterprise that understands its weighty responsibility towards the very vulnerable populations we serve.
And
I
surprising
want to
need.
publicly express my gratitude to the ORR team for never letting up against the many challenges they face daily in prioritizing the safety and well-being of the unaccompanied children who come into our care. These dedicated professionals may not be the parents of these kids, but they are, and all of us at HHS are, all in. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my testimony. I look forward to your questions.
Stunning and
Thank you,
brave.
Mr.
Now we get to the
Secretary.
good
We'll now
stuff.
proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Becerra, do your policies at ORR place priority on speedy placement of the unaccompanied child with sponsors or taking care of their safety and protection once they've been placed?
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. The safety and well-being of children in our custody is our number one priority.
Well, so that's important to know because your record indicates that biometrics for the sponsors were eased up there. The use of DNA, I'm going to read from your directive from March 22nd, 2021. Use of DNA is only used for the purpose of establishing biological relationships for purposes of sponsorship and is not submitted to law enforcement personnel or run against law enforcement databases. Guess that last part? Not submitted to law enforcement personnel and not run against law enforcement databases. And get this part, submission of DNA by the parent is voluntary. How in the world does that protect the child, the unaccompanied minor, when actually what you're doing, you're saying the parent, whether you submit the DNA, that's voluntary. So you're going to be taking whoever it is, the sponsor, their word. So how does that protect the child?
Chairman, thank you for the question. We use a number of tools to make sure we can identify the child and certainly do the background checks on anyone who wishes to be a sponsor. We always hope that we can get the most direct information about the the people who are wishing to sponsor these children. And we use, as you mentioned, a number of techniques, including fingerprinting and DNA on occasion when it helps us to
On occasion.
You see the bullshit that these people, what these people come up with? So the standard was that you had to go through a DNA test to prove that you were a child's parent. But now what they use is a number of different techniques, probably nothing at all. And they hope that the people who are attempting to sponsor these children are being honest. When you go get a driver's license, I was just in the DMV today trying to get a placard. They don't hope that you have your information. If you don't have like the proper documents, you ain't getting shit. And that's what happened to me today. The reason I went there was for a placard, and I had one piece of paperwork missing, and I didn't get a placard. Now, the standard for you taking a Spanish child at the border, or whatever child passes at the border, the standard for you going out there and being given one is basically less than it is for me to get a parking placard at the New Jersey DMV. But that, again, that's Democrat speak. So, oh yeah, we did away with giving up DNA samples, but we use a number of different tools. A number of different tools that one of them is that we hope people are being honest when they're taking these children off our hands.
Children, and we use, as you mentioned, a number of techniques, including fingerprinting and DNA on occasion when it helps us to
On occasion. And if you don't have the DNA and you don't have the fingerprints, how in the world are you checking the databases for the background? How are you getting them?
We have a number of techniques that we use to make sure we're...
What are they?
They could include any number of things such as, sometimes it will include...
Democrat speak. You see, like when you ask what's name them, they start beating around the bush. But again, too, that the fact that they would use that DNA data to try to prove that you were the parent of a child would be extremely helpful for our criminal agencies in this country. For instance, if you have a rapist and you get a hit that this person who's trying to now claim a child is theirs, you find out that they were responsible for rape within your country, that would be helpful. But this department did away with all that the reason that they did away with all that is so they could process in migrants faster. The only reason that these people operated in this capacity. They wanted more migrants and more children, particularly, that are now unaccounted for, according to this mop of shit right here, Secretary Becerra. They wanted more migrants coming in more rapidly. And again, in the case of children, they want the children to come in more rapidly.
Background, how are you vetting them?
We have a number of techniques that we use to make sure we're.
What are they?
They can include any number of things such as, sometimes it will include fingerprints, it will include a direct interview with the individual, it will be a check on citizenship documents, it will be a.
How often do you use fingerprinting or DNA?
Again, it depends on the type of information we have to identify the individuals who are wishing to sponsor.
So let's read this one here. This is from Directive.
So he doesn't have an answer as to when they use DNA, because a good time would be if we can't verify it through other means, such as paperwork, documents, then we go to the last option, which is DNA. They don't say that though. What they say is that they've probably used DNA once or twice, like throughout this process, so they could have their asses covered in the hearing by saying, "Oh well, we did 100 cases of DNA, verifying for 100,000 kids that are now missing." So technically, yeah, we did use DNA, Democrat speak, but not in all cases. In all cases, we hope that people are being candid, which is what the secretary said earlier.
10 days later, March 31st, 2021, effective immediately, background check requirements for adult household members and alternate adult caregivers identified in a sponsored care plan are not required as a condition of release under any category 2.
See, so the standard went from verifying via DNA to now you don't have to verify via DNA. Again, he mentioned that this came into effect in March of 2021. President Biden took office January 21st, 2021. 2 months later, less than 2 months later, the use of proving you were a parent to one of these unaccompanied kids by proving it through your DNA and the child's DNA was thrown out the window. Again, to be clear.
So it's not required all the time, right? It's just it's voluntary for DNA for parents. So how can you say that your number one priority is the safety of these unaccompanied children when you're placing in the sponsors' homes that, in an occasion, have had criminal gang affiliations because there's been no proper background check? How can you say that?
Congressman, if you follow child welfare best practices, you do an extensive background check. We follow child welfare best practices, so we do those extensive background checks.
So wouldn't child welfare best practices include what was already in place? Checking somebody's DNA to make sure that they're related to this child? That's just me.
In an occasion have had criminal gang affiliations because there's been no proper background check.
And for any dipshit that says that, oh, well, like that was the situation at the border, they had to process all these people in. No, they didn't. These people weren't an American problem prior to 2021, dipshits.
How can you...
The Biden administration made this an American problem. To be clear, the Biden administration, the Cami Joy administration lost hundreds of thousands of kids that are God knows where, likely dead.
Congressman, if you follow child welfare best practices, you do an extensive background check. We follow child welfare best practices, so we do those extensive background checks, which could include any number of things.
So how did it happen? I've got this report I'd like to submit to the record. This is Senator Grassley's report.
Without objection.
How did we see children end up in the homes of MS-13 gang members as the sponsor? How'd that happen?
Congressman, I don't have any information before me that you're referencing, but what I can tell you is that no sponsor would be allowed to take a child if we have information that shows that they are engaged in criminal activity.
But if you don't do the vetting right, you don't know if they're engaged in criminal activity.
Bingo.
That's how you end up with an MS-13 gang member as the sponsor. That's how you end up with pedophiles getting 20 children in the same home. That's how you end up there, because the vetting's been crappy. I mean, that's the bottom line. So, if we go on and we get into this other aspect where you say the emphasis is on safety, not speed, I'm going to read to you now the memo of concern filed in July of 2021. And the reason I read this, even though it's dated somewhat, it seems to be still the conditions. This is from page 2. Since the beginning of this current influx, ORR field staff have seen the transformation of the Division of Unaccompanied Children's Operations within ORR from a child welfare focus model to one that emphasizes what seems to be, quote, release to someone as soon as possible, close quote, model, close quote. So, I know you've lost contact with the
Let's rewind that.
ORR field staff have seen the transformation of the Division of Unaccompanied Children's Operations within ORR from a child welfare focus model to one that emphasizes what seems to be, quote, release to someone as soon as possible, close quote, model, close quote. So, I know you've lost contact with these children, and now we're told that when you lose contact with these children, it's not being lost, but it is being lost. I ask for all of these to be included in the record, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Without objection, gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Jayapal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, again, we're gonna fast forward through this Ms. Jayapal's part because it's basically the same shit as all these other Democrats are doing on this panel, which is basically saying that this immigration is not just a Biden problem, it's a Trump problem too. Even though nobody saw migrants coming in waves under the Trump administration, you know, that's basically Democrat speak. It's not just our problem. It's our, you know, it's been happening, and well, it's not as bad as you think. Or one little word that you said is off, so you're wrong. Like,
Some information, provide the advocacy, but again, it's all contingent on having the resources to go to that extent of services.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Bates for a unanimous consent request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the rule that the witness might have referred to is Title 45. I'd like to submit it for the record, where it makes public records checks and FBI national crime checks optional for the sponsors and adults living in
Without objection, Mr. Tiffany is recognized for 5 minutes.
again, I'm
Mr.
using the
Chairman,
video for
the
educational
ranking
purposes only.
member ripped on the Trump appointees in his opening remarks, which we largely expected. But I just asked the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, do you have a medical degree?
I do not.
You do not have a medical degree. Are you familiar with the Florida grand jury presentment that they did about a year and a half ago in 2023 in regards to unaccompanied alien children?
I'm somewhat familiar with it. I was briefed on it on many occasions.
Are you familiar that in that report, it revealed that children were pimped out by their aunt, which it turns out the aunt wasn't even related to the child, the so-called aunt. Are you familiar with that story that was in there?
There are a number of incidents that are reported in that Florida report. Some of
Yes
them,
or no?
I can probably recall better than others. Some of them I would challenge and dispute, but that one I don't remember.
And do you remember?
So he's basically asking regarding an instance in which a supposed aunt of a child who was found out not to be an aunt of the child or not related to the child was pimping out a migrant child that was in her custody. Again, if this was happening, if this was in a vacuum or this was an anomaly or something that didn't happen that often with these unaccompanied minors, then this director or secretary, Becerra, would have recalled that instance rapidly. But he's supposedly read some of these reports, but can't recall an instance of a illegal migrant child that entered into this country being pimped out by somebody who his department that he's overseeing released this child to that wasn't related to the child. Now, if these things weren't happening that often, he could recall that because it would be
The
a
teenage
travesty.
girl,
It would be a travesty that happened in his department or because of his department. But he can't recall that because this shit's happening all the time. There's hundreds of thousands of kids that are missing officially.
The report, some of them I can probably recall better than others. Some of them I would challenge and dispute, but that one I don't remember.
and do you remember the teenage girl that was in a house with unknown men with no private bedroom for her? Are you familiar with the sponsors that utilize a strip club in Jacksonville as an address for where a child should be settled?
Congressman, as I said, I don't have the information on that Florida grand jury report in front of me. I certainly can go back and take a look at it and try to get back to you.
Are you familiar?
See, another instance, a child that was left in an address that was actually the address of a strip club. You know, with Democrats, sex work is a noble profession, so they probably rationalized it that way. Continue.
That the case managers are only performing home studies, or the case managers are only doing case studies or home studies in 4.5% of placements in Florida. Only 4.5%. In fact, discretionary home studies were 1%. Is that all you folks are checking up on? These kids that are so vulnerable?
1%. 1% of these kids that were released out into the wild have been checked on after the fact. And this is in Florida. I mean, like if they're walking on hot eggshells anywhere with this migrant operation, you would think that would be a place like Florida with the bigoted governor like Ron DeSantis. He wouldn't allow no migrant chicanery happening within his state. So you would think that they walk on eggshells, but you have reports of one instance, a young lady being left in a house of men. Another instance where another young kid was being pimped out. Another instance, you name it. I mean, like, and that's just Florida. This guy's only bringing up his constituents.
Congressman, thank you for the question.
In fact, discretionary home studies were 1%. Is that all you folks are checking up on? These kids that are so vulnerable?
Congressman, thank you for the question. Congress, in passing the laws that apply to the unaccompanied children, said that home studies would be reserved for those children who came to us with circumstances that show trauma or the need for additional services. So by law, by statute passed by you in Congress, those of you in Congress in the past, we have the obligation to conduct these home studies only in those particular cases. We provide a home study.
So you decided to.
So this is how they play the game. That these standards were probably set in place when our unaccompanied minor problem was probably limited to a couple hundred or maybe a few thousand. They keep that same standard in place, but they rack the system with thousands and thousands and thousands of migrant unaccompanied children, and then keep that same standard in place. If you gave a shit about them so much so that you're willing to reclassify them as asylum seekers or unaccompanied, then you would maybe put a lot of effort into being vigilant and seeing that they're not being pimped out or likely ended of their lives. And that's not happening here. 1% of these people are being checked after the fact.
To the minimum.
No, that's
1%. That's what you
about to
say.
go there.
Okay, here's the law. That's all we're going to do. In the meantime, you got.
So 1% of the time.
Statute passed by you in Congress, those of you in Congress in the past, we have the obligation to conduct these home studies only in those particular cases. We provide a home study.
So you decided to do the minimum.
No, that's
1%. That's what
about
you
to go
said.
there.
Okay, here's the law. That's all we're going to do. In the meantime, you got kids being placed in addresses like a strip club in Jacksonville, Florida.
That's what I was trying to say. That's not the case.
In your testimony.
We do home studies at our discretion. Most of the time, we have to require, we have to wait till we have the funding, or we have the funding to do those discretionary home studies, but we've expanded them, and that's why the foundational rule has become so important.
In your testimony, you said you coordinate with the states and
Expanded.
local municipalities to make sure that you're working with them.
Expanded to what, 1.5%?
But we've expanded them, and that's why the foundational rule has become so
Up
important.
from
In your
1%?
testimony, you said you coordinate with the states and local municipalities to make sure that you're working with them. In this Florida presentment, it says neither U.S. Department of Homeland Security or HHS actively coordinates or consults with the state on the UAC that are resettled in Florida. Did you see that part of the study? You aren't coordinating with them? Why are you not coordinating with them?
I find that hard to believe, because remember, we used to have programs in Florida that had licensed care facilities. Florida decided to unlicense these facilities, and so we've been in constant touch with.
So you said you've seen some of the, what was presented here. Do you dispute the study from Florida?
I have a number of issues with the Florida report.
If you would share with me at an appropriate time, not today, if you want to share with me all the things you dispute in that study, that presentment by Florida, I would really like to see it. Because then I want to take it to Florida and ask them, what were you lying about? Because obviously you're telling me that there's some misrepresentation by Florida here. Is that right?
Well, one thing you could really help us with is checking with Florida to find out why they decided to not allow licensed caregivers be part of our program. All the kids that we place in care, we try to place in licensed
Do you believe you're in charge of an assembly line as the chairman of the...
If I could just conclude, but the important thing about Florida is Florida took affirmative action to unlicense centers.
I'll wait for your answer in regards to Florida offline here. That'll be just fine. I want to ask you the Harris question. Would you change anything that you've done over the last 4 years in regards to illegal immigration?
Recognizing that we don't deal with immigration that is part of DHS's authority, we deal with the human services side of care for kids.
Would you change anything that you've done in the last 4 years with 320,000 children unaccounted for by your administration?
That number changes in this testimony, or in this hearing. Some at the end they mentioned over 400,000, but this gentleman mentions 270,000 that are unaccompanied for. To have even one missing or unaccounted for is a travesty. But that number is hundreds of thousands.
Would you change anything that you've done in the last 4 years with 320,000 children unaccounted for by your administration?
We work tirelessly to strengthen and improve the program of the UC, the unaccompanied children that come before us, and we work really hard to make sure we first and foremost protect the safety and the well-being of those kids. Every day is a challenge, and we do the best we can.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Nadler for 5 minutes.
Mr. Secretary, since Mr. Tiffany kept cutting you off, would you rate?
Yeah, we don't need to listen to Jerry Nadler's stupidity. Snake. Chip Roy, I believe.
You mentioned the state of Florida. And
Fire to you back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Roy of Texas.
I thank the chair, thank the secretary for appearing for the subcommittee. You mentioned the state of Florida in the context of, I think you characterized it as not being willing to work with HHS. On March 29th, 2023, a Florida grand jury released a report detailing the impact of the UAC influx at the southern border. The grand jury made some of the following conclusions of the Office of Refugee Resettlement, the component agency within HHS entrusted to you, Mr. Secretary. Excerpt, quote, a disturbing pattern has emerged whereby the same sponsor applies to receive multiple UACs, sometimes at the same address, sometimes at a different one. Some individual sponsors apply to receive more than one child at more than one address simultaneously. One address in Texas had 44 children sent to it, another had 25. One sponsor in Benita Springs, Florida had multiple children sent to multiple addresses.
So one person in Florida had, or one address had 44 unaccompanied minors that were dropped off in Texas.
Same sponsor applies to receive multiple UACs, sometimes at the same address,
And some of these sponsors that are applying for kids are illegal themselves.
sometimes at a different one. Some individual sponsors apply to receive more than one child at more than one address simultaneously. One address in Texas had 44 children sent to it, another had 25. One sponsor in Benita Springs, Florida had multiple children sent to multiple addresses, and he applied using different versions of his hyphenated surname. One address.
And listen, for anybody that tries to say, oh, well, it's probably a big building in Texas, I'm going to tell you right now, I'll go to, I'll name a project, a housing project, Wyckoff Houses in Brooklyn, New York. I could guarantee you that in Wyckoff Houses, which is a pretty big housing project in Brooklyn, New York, the project, that there's not 44 migrant children living in there right now since 2021 that are actively there right now. And there's a series of buildings. There's not one building. And there's no projects like that in fucking Texas where it's just one address and 44 kids are going to end up there. Full of shit.
Austin, Texas, a town which I represent, had more than 100 UAC released to a single family dwelling. Mr. Secretary.
100 unaccompanied minors that were released to yuppie Austin, Texas to one address. For those, and the rainbow community is very strong in Texas too, in Austin. 100 unaccompanied minors were dropped off in this address. Shame.
Is this remotely consistent with the claims by your department that you're doing everything in your power to ensure child security?
Congressman, thank you for the question. All potential sponsors, anyone who wishes to apply to sponsor a child, must undergo extensive vetting process that follows child welfare best practices. We use a variety of tools. We try to monitor as best we can. And recently, through the foundational rule, we have established an even more extensive process for vetting as well.
Do you believe that the HHS foundational rule from April 30th of 2024 is consistent with what you just said in terms of background checks? Is it sufficient?
The foundational rule is what we built to try to give us a better way to not only care for kids, but also make sure.
Does it require full public records background checks?
I'm sorry?
Does it require full public records background checks and FBI national criminal history checks?
As I said, we follow child welfare best practices when it comes to.
Yes or no, though? Do you do the full criminal history checks for the potential sponsors of these children?
Well, yes, we follow best practices.
Right. The answer is no.
It's a yes, we follow child welfare best practices.
Yeah, that's not my question. My question is, do you do background checks, the full criminal records, public background checks for the FBI national criminal history?
We certainly check for criminal records. We check for a sex offender in the sex offender registry. We do, again, the different things that the foundation, that.
The rule I'm talking about says you do not.
I'm sorry?
The rule that we're talking about that was released on April 30th, 2024 says you do not.
We do not what?
That you do not carry out FBI national criminal history checks for all potential sponsors.
We do background checks on every individual.
Right, but that's a slippery description. What I'm saying is this rule is pretty clear in what it's saying that you do not provide the kind of background checks, which, by the way, has created a problem. So let me move on because the interest.
Yeah, he's not describing what kind of background checks that he does do. I mean, any background check in the United States is going to have a FBI background check. For anything that's not like, for anything that goes beyond a state issue. And again, this is a federal issue. I mean, these are federal departments. They have access to these things where they could process these things really rapidly as far as background checks go, criminal background checks with the FBI. They just choose not to do it. They need these people in here, these children in here, to come really fast.
Time, are you familiar with Maria Gonzalez, an 11-year-old girl who lived in Pasadena, Texas? In August 2023, Ms. Gonzalez was allegedly raped and murdered by Juan Carlos Garcia Rodriguez, a Guatemalan national, who appealed to the southern border as a UAC in January of 2023 and was 17 years old. A month later, HHS released Garcia Rodriguez to a sponsor with a criminal history and who previously had 2 other UACs in his care. Failed to enroll them in school as required by HHS. How about the situation with respect to another individual, Kayla Hamilton, Are you familiar with Walter Javier Martinez? Martinez was a 17-year-old from El Salvador who appeared at the border as a UAC in March of 2022. Months later, in July 22, he raped and murdered Kayla Hamilton, a 20-year-old woman in Maryland. After Martinez's release from the border and before Mrs. Hamilton's tragic death, HHS released him to a sponsor in May of 2022. Despite Martinez having gang tattoos and an arrest record for illicit association with MS-13. Mr. Secretary, how can you credibly claim that HHS is working to protect these children? And by the way, children we're talking about in the order of magnitude of 400 and something thousand children, which...
So again, in the instance of this individual, 17 years old, showing up at the border with gang tattoos and all and then he ends up murdering and raping a woman in Maryland. I'm sorry. At 15, like I was doing all kinds of there. At 16, I was already the fucking leader of one of the bigger gangs in New York, as far as Brooklyn goes. You know, you could do a lot of damage at 17. So why would I want some 17-year-old gangbanger like coming into this country, and just because he's not 18 of yet, he classifies as an unaccompanied minor? Get the fuck out of here.
22. Despite Martinez having gang tattoos and an arrest record for illicit association with MS-13. Mr. Secretary, how can you credibly claim that HHS is working to protect these children? And by the way, children we're talking about in the order of magnitude of 400 and something thousand children, which you are dismissing that they are lost. Let me ask you a very specific question, Mr. Secretary. Can you account for the whereabouts of those 400 and something thousand children? The 320,000 that were put in the report by the Inspector General, the 85,000 that we've talked about before in 2023. Do you know where all of these children are and that they are safe? Yes or no?
Congressman, as I explained the process, we get these kids when they are referred to us by the Department of Homeland Security. We then provide them with care while they are in our custody. We lose custody of those kids once we find a vetted sponsor with whom they can stay.
A vetted sponsor that rapes and murders the people that they're entrusted to? Because you issue a rule that doesn't even do the background check? That's what you think is appropriate care for these children?
Yeah.
I yield back, Mr. Chair.
We do background checks.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Yeah, we do background checks. That's his response. What if the background check that you do doesn't include an FBI background check like he just admitted to? Background check means, for a Democrat to say they do a background check at this stage is basically they ask for a name or some shit.
Chair recognizes Mr. Correa of California.
And we fast forward. We don't need to listen to Democrats. And again, I'm playing by the leftist rule, because if you guys find out that a report is from Fox News or some shit, I mean, you could dismiss it outright. Oh, it's Fox. So I know how but I don't need to listen to what these Democrats are gonna say, because what they're basically riding this guy's pole throughout this congressional hearing, because he's also a Democrat. Democrats don't go against their own. I mean, prove me wrong. How many Democrats do you see calling out other Democrats besides Manchin? Oh, Manchin. Oh, yeah, Manchin. Like, you know, Cinema. They like the two that are always brought up. One of them isn't even in Congress anymore, or Senate, whatever she was. Secondly, they only call each other out when they step out of line. Republicans, I mean, I could call out at least 10 Republican congressmen that are slimy ass creatures. One of them that's on this panel.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary, I want to thank you for your service in Congress.
And I only say that because I don't need to listen to Democrats
I'm a blunt guy, so you're going to have to forgive me in advance. But what's going on here is bad. You know, you talked about mandates. We have a human mandate, a humane mandate, an American mandate. I hear lots of words as, you know, we talk about the bureaucracy, and we talk about, you know, all the speeches that everybody's given, and lots of money is the answer to it, and money sometimes helps, no doubt about it, but you have to have the basic rules, the basic foundation to do things right. And just before I go into some questions and ideas here, let's tell the truth. It's tell the truth time. We ease the background checks greatly. Yes, you do very often do background checks, but they're not good enough, and that was done in the rule. We allow those who want to refuse criminal background checks, and some kids are put in those homes. And
Background check optional.
Having a criminal background is not prohibited. Let's tell the truth. I can read, this committee can read, we all can read, we know what the truth is, and that all sponsors are not vetted. That's the truth. That's what's really happening. Let's deal with the real world. And you've played an integral role in establishing the Unaccompanied Children program foundational rule. The details of the rule to me are so appalling that it's no wonder some of the worst individuals have been able to exploit it and slip into our country. It's no wonder that.
See, this guy's kind of useless too, and he's a Republican. He's not really digging into this guy and trying to find out what's what. Well, one question that these people should have asked is, what's the minimum requirement under what you guys consider vetting or a background check?
Hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied alien children are gone missing under this watch. The details of the rule, in my opinion,
I just want to get that number again.
And slip into our country. It's no wonder that hundreds of thousands of unaccompanied alien children are gone missing under this watch.
Missing.
The details of the rule, in my opinion, are insane. We're dealing with kids. We're dealing with children. The rule allows sponsors to refuse background checks. As I said, let me say it again. A sponsor can refuse a background check, and they still can be eligible for taking on a vulnerable child.
Shouldn't the fact that somebody refuses a background check be suspect? Or shouldn't that disqualify you from taking a child, an unaccompanied minor? That's just me. I mean, because if a cop stops you, there are times when you tell them, like, you know, I don't want to get out the vehicle. And that's reason enough for them to bring a dog out and sniff your car. And that's acceptable. But the standards that you, an American, driving your Honda around and being bothered by a police officer are far less than for some suspicious criminal, at times undocumented migrant, to then take on the care of a unaccompanied minor and do God knows what with them. Those standards are far less than you just operating your Honda Civic around in whatever hovel you live in at this time.
No state adoption agency anywhere in this country, in any state in this country, that would allow this for any foster parent, for any adoptive parent, for any American citizen who wanted to adopt. Why are we not holding sponsors of unaccompanied children to at least the same standard that we hold them? The rule also fails to disqualify individuals with criminal records or child welfare violations from serving as sponsors. How wrong is that? Again, we wouldn't allow an adopted American citizen to do that to an adopted child.
See, so I mean, the fact that you used the child or the fact that you have a criminal record doesn't stop you from taking an unaccompanied minor. Again, without proving who you are, without a criminal background check, none of that stuff matters.
Unaccompanied children to at least the same standard that we hold them. The rule also fails to disqualify individuals with criminal records or child welfare violations from serving as sponsors. How wrong is that? Again, we wouldn't allow an adopted American citizen to do that to an adopted child. Why do we let them? But it gets worse. The rule also actively prevents the sharing of critical immigration-related information with enforcement. It said certain things are your job. That's what enforcement is there for. There should be a communication. There should be a dialogue back and forth, especially when sponsors are under investigation for human trafficking or smuggling. You want to know that from the feds. It's evil. It's wrong. I don't know how we justify it. The rule works to undermine age verification processes, and you can read it in the rule. I'm not making it up. Which it enables adults posing as children to exploit the system and gain easier access into the United States of America. And even if there is evidence of criminal backgrounds, the rule is designated to create barriers to placing the UACs in secure facilities. This committee has seen the tragic real-world examples of it. Some of it was mentioned by my colleagues. Kayla Hamilton, 20-year-old young woman. She was brutally raped. She was brutally beaten. She was murdered by someone with ties to MS-13 who pretended to be a minor. And nobody stopped it. If we had done our job and put the safety of Americans and the safety of kids over processing illegals quickly, she would still be alive today. And I associate myself with some of the remarks that Congressman Correa said. They're kids. We all love our kids. I know you love your kids. Think about that. This woman's dead. We're not going to bring her back, ever. There's no speech, no bureaucratic action that's going to bring her back. I've seen a lot of stuff, man. I've been in the state senate, the state assembly, county commission, mayor, congressman now for 6 years. Man, I haven't seen too many rules that are worse than this rule, because it deals with kids and it hurts children. It's bad for everyone involved. It's bad for taxpayers. It's bad for American communities. And it's bad, most importantly, for the undocumented children. So I have some questions. I got 23 seconds. Secretary Becerra, I just want a yes or no. Knowing how this rule has worked, do you still believe it was the right answer to the border crisis? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Congressman, the way you've interpreted the rule is not the rule that we passed, so it'd be tough to give you a yes or no.
Well, your interpretation of the rule, do you think it was right?
Well, let me give you a quick example.
I don't need an example, I need a yes or a no. Mr. Secretary, I need a yes or a no. I can always answer questions yes or no. Is the rule good? Is it what you want? Would you continue with it, yes or no?
Congressman, you said a sponsor can refuse a background check. That's not true. No sponsor who wishes to take a child can refuse a background check.
I read the rule. I have people read the rule a whole lot smarter than me.
That's not the rule we enforce.
I unfortunately have to yield back. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit these questions to the chair.
So without objection. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Garcia.
Thank you today and to your staff for all the work and the progress that's been made to a very imperfect system, and its history goes back a long, long ways. As a former and current
Democrat cock blower. Fast forward.
Certain member, and I won't give her name, but her initials are AOC, put on a white suit and went to the...
Mr. Moore.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome. You know, before my time, I understand that this committee had 3 hearings on lost children under the Trump administration. At that time, it was only 1,000 lost children. If I remember correctly, there was a certain member, and I won't give her name, but her initials are AOC, put on a white suit and went to the border to protest this 1,000 lost children. And now, my friend, the New York Times, actually, this is not a Republican rag, by the way. I reported in February of 2023, HHS had lost over 85,000 unaccompanied children. And my question to you is, as this process continues, I think you're in over your head. I think the administration has buried you. I don't think there's any way you can keep track of what's going on the southern border, and we're losing children by the droves. And when you talk about background checks, how is it that one individual could get 20 children? How does that happen, Mr. Secretary?
Congressman, thanks for the question. Actually, I think I heard 2 questions there. The first is on lost, 85,000 lost kids. Again, not answering a phone call, that does not mean a child.
Mr. Secretary, let me tell you something. If my wife calls one of my kids, and on about the second call, we don't know where that child is, it is pandemonium around the Moore household. And I got news for you. When you're losing children to the tune of 85,000, there are parents somewhere in this world, I don't know where the parents are, that are sending these children here for some reason. And they're being trafficked, they're being used for child labor. And again, this is the New York Times. This is not a Republican talking point. This is not a Republican rag. This is the New York Times talking about the mismanagement of this administration of these children and how we've lost them. And so my question to you is, how does one sponsor get 20 children? If we're background checking, in fact, how does that happen?
Congressman, every sponsor must go through a background check process. Every sponsor must be able to show...
Mr. Secretary, what if they're a foreign national? Are you background checking if they're foreign nationals? Is it possible that MS-13 is bringing the people across the border and taking custody of these children and putting them into trafficking and other unspeakable sort of things? Is that possible?
Remember, I mentioned in my opening testimony that the vast majority 80-90% of the kids that we place are placed with the parent.
If you're not doing bioidentical, if you're not
vast
identifying
majority.
these people, biometrics, how,
So they mentioned 400,000 kids. So if 90% or up to 90% are released with competent people, or let me see what he said. That means that there's at least 40,000 that were released to God knows who.
80-90% of the kids
10% of them
are placed with the
80-90%. You can't even bring up the actual number.
is that possible?
Remember, I mentioned in my opening testimony that the vast majority, 80-90% of the kids that we place are placed with the parent.
If you're not doing bioidentical, if you're not identifying these people, biometrics, how do you know they're the parents?
So there are many ways to provide or to prove identity.
Name them.
So they can prove identity to take custody of children, but not to vote. Is that what you're telling me?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
So you're saying voter ID doesn't need to be required. There's no way to verify somebody's identity. But if they're going to take custody of a child in a foreign country, you're saying they do have an ID or they need to have an ID.
You said voter ID?
Yeah, what I'm saying, in other words, is you're requiring ID for these people supposedly to take these children, but then you say many times in the left, they said, well, voter ID is racist or discriminatory. So explain to me, how is it that you're verifying the ID of these people if they don't have IDs and nobody can get IDs?
Thank you for the question. Identity documents are one of the many tools that we use to try to ascertain the relationship of the child with the potential sponsor. But there are many other things that we'll do. If there's a sponsor that has not provided sufficient identification and proven that tie to the child, we can turn to things like fingerprinting if we need.
So you think this person
They
who got
can.
these 20
They
children
could
is
turn
related
to
to
it.
all 20 of those kids? Is that what I'm hearing, or?
What I can tell you again is that every sponsor must go through a vetting process in order to be able to sponsor any child.
But if they're a foreign national, we do vet those people as well, or?
Anyone who wishes to apply to sponsor a child must go through the process. If they decline to go through the process, they cannot sponsor.
Well, earlier one of the members mentioned that a certain sponsor had had kids delivered to different addresses. How do y'all cross-reference that? How do you justify that?
I'm not familiar with any case.
They're never
referencing,
familiar
but what I
with.
will tell you again
That's
is-
the thing with Democrats. You mentioned something that's really bad, like a particular instance, like he just mentioned, where there's one person applying for multiple unaccompanied minors in several different addresses. So this should be a travesty. But they'll go. But they're very vapid about these things happening. Like
Anyone who wishes to apply to sponsor a child must go through the process. If they decline to go through the process, they cannot sponsor.
Well, earlier one of the members mentioned that a certain sponsor had had kids delivered to different addresses. How do y'all cross-reference that? How do you justify that?
I'm not familiar with any
See,
cases
he's not
you're
familiar.
referencing, but what I will tell you again is when we
That was a
go
part of
through-
grand jury case, by the way.
When we go through the background checks, we ascertain any number of things, including the residence, where the child will be placed. We check on the household members in that place as well, in the home. So we go through the process of not only vetting sponsors, but we also check with some of those members in the household.
So in the Florida grand jury case where the one child was delivered to the strip club, did y'all vet that location? I mean, was that considered a house? I mean, is the strip club now considered a house for children being trafficked or lost?
As I mentioned, Congressman, we can discuss the Florida report. There are many issues that we have with that report.
Let me ask you a real quick question. I'm going to change subjects real quick. And many of the members have mentioned it, the Kayla Hamilton case where Mr. Martinez, he came across as an unaccompanied child and then ended up killing Ms. Hamilton. How many UACs, unaccompanied children now, do we have in secure facilities? Are you housing in secure facilities? Do you know?
We use secure facilities if we don't believe that we can manage the children or keep the children that they would be around safe, or perhaps even for the safety of the individual. I don't have that number. I can take that back to my team.
Yeah, we'd be curious to know that. I'm kind of trying to figure out how in the world I had a situation in one of my areas where a young lady was raped by a 31-year-old that identified as an unaccompanied child, and he came to this country and then drug a 14-year-old girl into a restroom and raped her, and yet he was identified as a child, and I don't know how you understand, like a 31-year-old, how do you identify that as a child? Is there any test on age when the kids come here? Do you get any documentation on birth certificates, anything like that?
you're going to many of the documents and the ways that we try to ascertain not just the child's identity, but also get that into the background of anyone who wishes to sponsor.
How does a 31-year-old?
Yeah, so how is it that a 31-year-old with all these tools that you use, supposedly, that you're trying to gloat about, all these tools that you use, rather than using DNA, which they used to have in place, these tools that they put in place are causing all these screw-ups, i.e. letting a 31-year-old come in as supposedly an unaccompanied minor, i.e. allowing minors to be dropped off at strip clubs, or having 44 minors in one home. There's no real vetting that's happening here. So these tools that he's gloating about using in place of like DNA, for instance, are useless. The shit's not working. 400,000 unaccompanied minors missing or unaccounted for. Like what are you gloating about tools? And look, and you could tell, like, this lady was pissing me off, like, and honestly, this is the reason as to why I didn't play the Democrats in this hearing. Well, I was debating, to be fair, whether to play it or not. But this twat that's here, mind you, we're talking about unaccompanied minors that are missing or that are now missing, and this lady was like one step away from blowing this guy that she's supposed to be interviewing regarding these unaccompanied minor issues. But they just make it seem as, oh, well, you know, it's no big deal. I mean, so technically they're not. I mean, technically they're not missing, or well, if you know, we don't have accountability. You know, we don't have to check in on them no more. So it's really not our problem. Like, you know, that's the bullshit that we hear. But you could tell by this woman's face. I mean, like, with such a serious issue, her demeanor, she's not trying to get no answers. She's just trying to distribute blame, which is basically the Democrat way. Protect our own and eviscerate those who are not part of us. Look at her smiling. She's having a great time. You know, none of this stuff matters to her. And again, I mean, you know, when it's made to seem as everything conservative has a tinge of racism within it. See, but the Democrats were responsible for this migrant wave that has come into this country, which resulted in several being raped and pimped out. God knows what happens to them. A lot of them are unaccounted for. But to them, it's all a big joke. You know, it's not that big of a deal. And I could wonder, me being a Puerto Rican man who's hypersensitive to race issues, I could say that maybe these people don't give a shit because these kids are spics. I mean, according to these white liberals. Like, what do they care about some Spanish kid that's missing? So long as their gardens are trimmed, who cares? You know, they don't give a shit. Like, maybe they'd give a shit if it were white children. I mean, like, the left loves to throw out on race politics. And for the proud place, being a New Yorican myself, I could play race politics too. But the fact that these Latin kids are missing, seemingly like the Democrats don't care. We'll continue. After this woman's speaking.
During your tenure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Lady yields back. On behalf of Mr. Briggs, the chair to request unanimous consent to place into the record a copy of the appropriations language of funding ORR at $6.4 billion for fiscal year 2020.
$6.4 billion. Guys, if you remember, the budget that Trump wanted to build a wall was $5 billion. $5 billion that they wanted, that Trump wanted to build the wall. He never really got it during the time of his administration. He was blocked all the way through, for the most part. $5 billion to build a wall, and that was made to seem like it was too much money, and because Trump wanted it, like, you know, it shouldn't happen. But they gave $6.8 billion to this Office of Refugee Resettlement, which did a shitty job at whatever the fuck they're doing. They're missing 400,000 kids plus. They're pimping out kids to some, like, as far as some of the people that they've dropped kids off to have then pimped out kids. Some of the people they dropped off kids to were addresses that were strip clubs. They're fucking up. 6.8 billion, that's okay, like for it to go into this crap. But for Trump to ask for 5 billion while he was the president for his wall, that was ridiculous.
Give my time back to the chair. Oh, well, thank you. Mr. Secretary, you mentioned, well, 3 calls that you make to follow up. It could be they just aren't by the phone, or they're at school or work or something. So, okay, so you make 3 calls and you can't contact either the sponsor or the child. So now what?
Congressman, I would pose the question back to you because
Well, now what? I mean, did you just shrug your shoulders and go on?
No, that's why we have tried to expand.
What are you doing then?
Well, that's why
As
we've
Mr. Moore
expanded.
said, if it was my child and I couldn't get a hold of them or the person who's looking after them in 3 separate phone calls, I would be freaking out. Now, you're the surrogate parent in this case. What do you do after the 3 calls go unanswered? You're telling us, you're assuring us, these children aren't lost, but how are you following up after that? Or are you?
Congressman, if you'll give me a chance to respond, because you pose a great question, because you and I as parents would want to make sure that we know what's going on with our children. And we make every effort. We don't have
3 calls and then...
Make every effort. 3 calls. If they don't pick up, move on.
Because you pose a great question, because you and I as parents would want to make sure that we know what's going on with our children. And we make every effort. We don't have...
3 calls and then what after that?
Congressman, our responsibility is to provide care while they are in our custody. Under the law...
Secretary, you have dropped them off at a sponsor's house. You now can't get a hold of
Yeah,
them.
our responsibility ends there. Whatever happens to them because we're not responsible.
Care while they are in our custody.
Spanish children
Under
are
the law.
fine.
Secretary, you have dropped them off at a sponsor's house. You now can't get a hold of them. That's on you. What do you do after that? What I'm hearing back is you don't do anything. You shrug your shoulders and then send another batch of kids out to another group of sponsors' homes. That's frightening to me, and it's frightening to everybody who has watched this terrible, terrible situation unfold on your watch. Mr. Van Drew mentioned your Unaccompanied Children Program foundational rule and noted that this was a giant step back from rigorous vetting. Failure to categorically disqualify sponsors with criminal or other child welfare history concerns, instead requiring case managers to first consider a potential sponsor's resources and strengths, never mind that they've got a criminal conviction. Barring the sharing of immigrant information for potential sponsors with law enforcement officials, finding out, are these people trustworthy? And weakening the veracity of age determinations of UACs by requiring forensic evidence that indicates that an adult is posing as a UAC, in your rule's words, should not be used as sole determining factor, but only in concert with other factors, and then shifting the burden of proof so that the ambiguous, debatable, or borderline forensic examination results are resolved in favor of finding the individual is a child. That doesn't sound like a step forward in rigorous vetting. It sounds like a step backwards to me. As mentioned, Senator Grassley's finding, and one particularly disturbing case, that one child was placed with a known affiliate of the dangerous MS-13 gang. Now, according to the documents, HHS disregarded multiple warnings by a case manager about the potential danger of the UAC being placed in this home, this rigorous vetting that you're talking about. You were actually warned by the case manager that you were placing this child with an MS-13 gang member. That doesn't sound like rigorous vetting to me. Since January 20th of 2021, when this administration took office, can you tell me the total number of unaccompanied children that HHS has placed with known or suspected gang members?
Was that a question to me?
Yes.
And please repeat the question. I thought you were making a comment.
The question is, how many children have been placed with known MS-13 gang members? We know of one. What do you know?
Congressman, obviously, when we go through the extensive vetting process, we would make sure that what we try to do is place them with someone who will keep them safe. Obviously, someone who is involved in gang activity would not be someone we would consider.
And yet you.
So how the hell does it happen?
You were warned by the case manager. You placed, what, 440 UACs with sponsors, 440,000 during your tenure?
We have placed a large number, I don't know if that's a precise number, but a large number.
Well, and again, you assure us that the department undertakes rigorous background reviews of all of these sponsors. So can you tell me how many sponsors have been rejected for failing to pass background checks?
Well, certainly no sponsor who where we flag certain activity, whether it's criminal records, where we flag.
How many have you flagged?
I certainly can try to get back to you with some information on that. I can take that back to my team. I don't have a number with me as we speak.
Did you know how many you've disqualified because of previous murder convictions?
I don't have those kinds of numbers.
How about child abuse convictions?
Certainly none of those individuals, when they go through the vetting process.
What about trafficking and child pornography? The ranking member reminds me that my Ruben's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Biden-Harris Refugee Resettlement Program is not your grandfather's refugee program, and I'm going to tell you why. You grew up thinking that refugees meant the most vulnerable people in the world, but not so much under the Biden-Harris administration. The left can never leave anything alone, and not even the U.S. Refugee Resettlement Program. Biden has reimagined U.S. refugees. You might have missed this, but the Biden-Harris administration in January 2023 created a program called the Welcome Corps. Under the Welcome Corps program, U.S. permanent residents, non-citizens, can recommend and sponsor non-citizens to be U.S. refugees. Yes, you heard that correctly. Non-citizens can sponsor non-citizens to become refugees in my America. Let's make an analogy that the liberal elites will understand. Imagine you are a member of a country club. You pay dues and you enjoy all the benefits that come with being a member of that club. Then one day, you invite a guest to visit the country club, and then the guest invites another non-member to visit the club. And before you know it, the membership is irrelevant. Another member may then ask, how are you inviting people to the club? Are you a member? And the guest will say, no, but I'm a lawful permanent resident. The whole purpose of reimagining the U.S. refugee program is to demean and devalue what it means to become a U.S. citizen. Citizenship matters, borders matter. Having borders is the difference between having a country run by President Trump or by a Haitian warlord barbecue. I am sure that some of you are familiar with the recent Spirit Airlines flight that landed in Haiti and was immediately met with gunfire. And as I said, borders are important. In 2020, under President Trump, close to 12,000 refugees were admitted into the United States. But just this past year, under the Biden administration, the number of admitted refugees has ballooned to over 100,000 people, the highest number in 3 decades. Let me tell you about another Biden-Harris initiative for non-citizens. The Biden-Harris administration has the initiative for refugees called the New Americans Partnership, which is an initiative that fosters collaboration between housing agencies and refugee resettlement agencies to support the housing needs of said new Americans. New Americans? What about the Americans that are already here? Americans are dreamers too. Americans are refugees too. They're refugees of Democrat-run cities. Now, I am sure there are Americans living in Inglewood who would love to move to Beverly Hills. I'm sure there are Americans living in Harlem that would love to move to the Upper East Side. I am sure there are Americans living in the South Side of Chicago who would love to move to Lake Forest. Take a look at the last census. Americans are fleeing Democrat-run states for the haven of Republican states. Why is that? Under the Biden-Harris administration, Americans are left behind while the needs of new Americans are pushed to the front of the line of tax-paying Americans. There's a reason why President Trump won every swing state this year and the first Republican to win the popular vote in 20 years.
Americans are sick and tired of being treated like second-class citizens in our own country. President Trump created opportunity zones for Black Americans. President Biden, the Democrat mayors, created opportunity zones for illegal immigrants. For the left, it's the new Americans first and Americans last.
Especially minority
I've
Americans.
said this before, it's not the Great Replacement theory. This is the definition of the Great Replacement fact.
Especially you minority Americans, Black Americans, Latin Americans that have been here. You're fastly being replaced. You're told to get in line. Don't ask for shit. When it comes to trying to elect Kamala Harris, because all you need to eat is Trump is bad. Don't ask for what should be distributed to you and your community to not be given to migrants that just arrived primarily into your community, Black man, into your community, Latin man in America. They're more important than you,
last.
according to the leftists.
I've said this before, it's not the Great Replacement theory. This is the definition of the Great Replacement fact. The left wants to allow millions of people into this country, whether that be legally or illegally, so that United States citizenship means essentially nothing. In this country, we don't have Americans or old Americans or new Americans. We just have my fellow Americans. Now that President Trump is back, I'm happy to say that all American citizens will be treated with respect once again. And with that, I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now claims his own 5 minutes to sum up the concerns I have with all of this checking that you keep assuring us is so rigorous. Your ORR director, Doug Marcos, told the committee that HHS routinely contacts foreign consulates or embassies in order to verify UAC's documents. Is that correct?
We work with the consulate offices, Mr. Chairman, to try to...
You verify the information of these children with the consulate. When you're doing that, do you ever ask for the child's criminal history? Again, we're talking about adolescents here, and sometimes adults pretending to be pretending to be adolescents.
As I've said before, Mr. Chairman, we're not a law enforcement agency, we're not an immigration agency.
No, you're a placement agency. You're placing these children in what you keep assuring us are carefully vetted homes. And yet, according to your own ORR director, admitting to this committee in a transcribed interview, that when HHS contacts the consulate to verify information on the UAC, they do not ask for any criminal background information on that UAC. So they don't know if it's a gang member, and they don't ask. Why would she tell us this?
Congressman, we go through a vetting process to ensure that we can know who the child is.
They don't describe the vetting process.
That's
though.
what she testified. But then she also testified.
God forbid he describes what the vetting process is in great detail, but certainly not DNA to check if these kids are released to an actual parent by checking the so-called parent's DNA or the family member's DNA in addition to the kid's DNA. No, that's the standard that was put in place, that was removed by the Biden administration in March of 2021. They do that standard supposedly sometimes, but he's also mentioning other standards that have been put in place or tools that they utilize to verify that these people that they're being released to, and at times these adolescents are who they say they are. That standard's gone out the window. And that standard's gone out the window because this is what they want. They want more migrants to come into this country, including children. And the results are that 400,000 plus of these children are now missing. But again, with leftist politicians, they could care less when it comes to quote-unquote minority children, and in this case Latin American children mostly that are lost. And I could play identity politics again. Sir Foul Player is a New Yorican, so you can't say, oh well, you only play that I don't have a claim to be mad at. motherfucker could bitch about like some shit that happened 500 years ago as to how they're suffering nowadays. Yet my peoples, I mean, even though I don't consider these new Latin cats my people, but for the sake of this argument, and if you want to get into identity politics, again, Sir Fopleski is a Latin American by definition. I'm Puerto Rican, born and bred in New York for the most part. Actually, I wasn't born in New York, but I was raised in Brooklyn since I was a babe. But I could play identity politics. Why can't Sir Fopleski be hurt by the fact that Latino children are missing at the rate of 400,000 since 2021 that have just came into the country to God knows what, prostitution in some cases, according to this congressional panel, being left with strippers, with rapists. See, that's all good though, but the leftists, of course, they don't care about minority children, only when it's useful.
Inquire.
And if you guys remember that buffoon AOC kneeling at a parking lot of a migrant center crying for a photo op, where are the tears now? Where are the tears when there's 400,000 that are missing? AOC, you're a Latin chick, aren't you? You're Latino like I am. Where's the rage for these 400,000 that are now missing? Or is it convenient because leftists lost them and the leftists work as one blob or one pack? It's convenient for the leftists not to bring this up right now.
The criminal background of these individuals who are 17 years old and sometimes older and pretending to be 17, with gang tattoos, with gang affiliations, and you don't, why you've got them on the phone and you are verifying information on that UAC, you don't bother to ask, oh, by the way, is this an MS-13 gang member? Does this individual have a criminal history? And then you place them in foster homes, you release them into our communities, and there are some cases, tragic cases, where they go on to murder innocent Americans like Kayla Hamilton.
See, in the foster system, prior to any of this popping off, was already packed. You'll hear leftists say, oh, well, why don't you adopt a kid? When it comes to like a debate regarding like abortion or something. You'll hear them say, oh, why don't you go adopt a kid? Like, you know, like they'll put it on you as if you're, you know, you have the capability and like the space to just uproot your life and like fucking take on a kid. I don't know what point I was trying to
By the way, is this an MS-13 gang member? Does this individual have a criminal history?
That's the point I was making in terms of the foster system. And I know a lot of kids that grew up in this foster system. When I was young, there was a foster home in 49th Street in my neighborhood. And Sir Fopleski would at times take advantage when I was a teenager, and I would link up with a lot of the chicks that were in the foster home that was on 49th Street between 3rd and 4th and Sunset Park back in the day. It's no longer there. But I was, because I knew it was easy, honestly. I'm being very candid. I'm a grown man now. I know I was wrong somewhat back then. But I know for sure in that house that it was inundated. It was they didn't have enough space. And I know for sure that the foster system in this country is wrecked. But when it comes to throwing more migrants or outsiders into that system, no problem. You know, we didn't have a problem to begin with. That's how the leftists think. Oh no, well the problem is the one that we created for you by our own making, and that supersedes everything, and then the conversation changes, and just get used to this new standard. Get used to these new migrants here, or else.
In foster homes, you release them into our communities, and there are some cases, tragic cases, where they go on to murder innocent Americans like Kayla Hamilton. Mr. Tiffany asked you, is there anything you do differently looking back on these past 4 years? Is there anything you do differently in the Kayla Hamilton case?
Mr. Chairman, we work closely with the Department of Homeland Security, which does the vetting for these children when they first enter into the country.
You're placing them. You're the ones that are placing them in people's homes, and you're the one who's telling me, don't worry about it. They're all carefully vetted. They're all secure. Don't worry that we can't reach them by phone after we've placed them in these homes. It might be they just weren't paying attention to the phone. Do you understand how this do you understand how this affects the lives of a population that you've placed that's approaching the size of the state of Wyoming? Some of them innocent, defenseless children, others gang members who are 17 years old or even older pretending to be 17.
And that are amongst
And
these
you're in
little
charge of all
children.
of this. And
You know,
can't tell
they're adolescents, 16, 17-year-old criminal types that are in and amongst little 6 and 5-year-olds that are in these same places, that are in the same spots, where you have wolves with baby sheep.
gang members who are 17 years old or even older pretending to be 17. And you're in charge of all of this. And you can't tell us if there's anything you'd even do differently after 4 years of this nightmare that has unfolded, not only for our country, but for these children and their families. What do you have to say for yourself, Mr. Secretary? This is the end of this administration. It's the end of your tenure. What do you have to say for yourself? Because the words that keep haunting me are those that Cromwell spoke to the Long Parliament. You have sat here too long for any good you have been doing. It is not fit that you should sit here any longer. You shall now give way to better men. Now depart and go, I say, in the name of God, go.
Chairman, if you will allow me then to respond. We work closely with various agencies. In the case of the vetting of the child, it is the Department of Homeland Security that does the initial vetting because they're the ones that have custody of that child once the child is in the U.S. The Department of Homeland Security is the agency that then goes through that process of trying to determine who this child is, including those issues that you mentioned with regard to any past criminal conduct. When we receive the children, Department of Homeland Security shares with us the information they have compiled on that child. From there, what we try to do is make sure we care for the child, and in the process of trying to find them a sponsor where they can live in a community, we go through the vetting of the individual's potential sponsor.
Mr. Secretary, when the history of this administration is written, I would not want to be you looking back on what historians say about your tenure. I'm sorry, but that's a fact. There's no further business to be brought before the committee. The subcommittee will stand adjourned.
Yeah, so that's it, guys. Again, I mean, now I have fucking 9 people here. I had like 4, throughout the making of this video. No fault of your own. I'm happy to have 1. But again, I use the Right Side Broadcasting stream to watch the congressional hearing on unaccompanied minors. I'm gonna try to do more of those because I actually watched a lot of congressional and Senate hearings, and a lot of them I find really interesting, and most people really don't have the time to watch them with any depth. But I'll make my assessment in the future. I mean, but my assessment largely is basically that what has taken place under this administration has basically without, I mean, and we're seeing more and more of and it's becoming more evident, is what I mean to say, that this administration enabled basically a human trafficking operation. And when you also figure in the fact that these are kids, which this horrible department was responsible for resettling, if you will, and the fact that 400,000 are now missing or released into really unscrupulous people or released into really dangerous situations where you have gangbangers in addition to strip club operators, in addition to people that are actually pimping these kids out for illicit things. Um, what more can you say? I mean, like, if you know, I don't think that at any stage that these people should be able to clear their hands of this, like, in the future. I'm hoping that every one of these kids is safe. Um, Unfortunately, I know what it is, and I see how a lot of these people that have come into New York, how they operate, this new migrant class. They operate like gangsters do, and gangsters nowadays are some of the grimiest motherfuckers going. Gangsters nowadays will. It's totally acceptable for them to pimp out their own sisters. I mean, whereas when I grew up, I mean, we would beat up people just for pimping. Um, on Sixth Avenue, as far as that was the standard with amongst my friends. You know, there was no pimping on our side, not one bit. We find that stuff deplorable. But I'm pretty sure you could get away with that on my street nowadays because these people people nowadays are the biggest thing that affects us is apathy. We don't give a shit. We're too busy to give a shit. But the fact of the matter is, and I'm not saying this because these are Latin children. In fact, not most Latin people, we hate on other Latin people as is. Like Mexicans hate on Puerto Ricans. Who cares? Puerto Ricans hate on Mexicans. Puerto Ricans hate on Dominicans. Dominicans hate on Puerto Ricans. That's just in New York City at least. But that's anywhere you look online. I mean, like, a Puerto Rican shows his face online, and the first people that are dissing him are Mexicans. I'm not saying that they're predisposed to doing that, but it's just what it is. We're not all like chugging along, lads. We're all a Latin family. No, we don't do any of that shit. Having said that, though, I'm not making a riff about this because it's Latin children, if you will, because there's a lot of Haitian children that are being snuck into the border and children from other countries as well. It's mostly the Latin children that are lost to this. But liberals like AOC could make a big stink and put on a white outfit and stand outside of a fence, not even looking at migrant children in a facility that Trump was utilizing to store or to detain migrants. Same facility that Obama used to detain migrants, but it was a big stink when Trump was doing it. You know, it was a sinful act, if you will. But now the fact that, all right, maybe they're not being detained for a long period at that same facility, although that same facility is being used for the same shit nowadays, in addition to the fact that they're just processing in people in mass that are largely, a lot of them children that are now missing. No big deal. I mean, like, AOC has long forgotten that we have a population of migrants that are so quote unquote abused in this country or mistreated. The fact that they're allowed to come in and God knows what happens to them isn't a big deal with the AOC, with the Democrats, and with the leftists at large. But with that, I'm gonna end this video. If you guys please subscribe to my channel. If you found this video tonight, it's by a miracle because the YouTube algorithm does not like Certified Player. But if you do, please help me by sharing, subscribing to this channel. I greatly appreciate it. I've seen a lot of evidence where so-called Black and Latino conservatives are on YouTube, and like the case of my man Sub-Zero 3639 Live, a fantastic channel run and operated by a Black gentleman who's in 2024 has conservative perspectives. But I see somebody like that whose subs are a little bit over 2,000, yet at times during his live stream, he'll have 200 people that are there, or more than 100. Whereas you'll see a channel with like 60,000 during a live stream, and they'll pull about, those same numbers. Why is that? because YouTube algorithm doesn't feed a man like Sub-Zero 3639 live. But you guys could. And if you guys could also render me similar help. I mean, to fight against the algorithm is tough, but I have no other option than to fight. But help me along with my fight if you could. Like, share, subscribe, comment. And also, I mean, like, I rather interplay and talk with people during these things. And I want to build that up too. I think things could be far more interesting in the future with conversations rather than me babbling on. But with that, I hope you guys have a wonderful evening or rest of your evening. I'm going to be back here maybe tomorrow, and we'll go from there. But I want to thank you guys again for subscribing to me. Thank you for stepping into the Foul Playland with yours truly, Sir Foul Player of Brooklyn. With that, actually I'll close it out with some kitten video with my little baby. She's sick. She's so sick. How the hell do I have 21 people watching now? Actually, I can't leave now. I mean, if 21 people are here, but I'll leave you guys with a little bit of this baby. She's sick though. You hear her? What's your matter? This cat has had a cold for the last 2 days, but she's a runt though. The problem is though that every time I usually shower with the door open, and when she goes in there, look at that. Is that not cute, my friend? And then this is the other cat that we're fostering. Her name is Glory, but yesterday I took a nap on the sofa and she came up to my chest, but when I try to pet her regular, she'll run from me. Come, Glory. And the thing is too, she loves me. This cat loves me, but she's fronting and doesn't let me love her up. Let me see. She's really cute though, but she's starting to grow up. I mean, she was like real chubby a couple weeks ago, but now what's your matter, Glory? When you gonna let me pet you again? Yesterday she was letting me pet her though, but today she's being a bitch. Actually, every day she's a bitch. But she's really nice though. We're trying to. If you guys don't know, I foster kittens in addition to TNR, which is trap and release with like strays. But my stray problem has not problem because I love my stray cats, but actually, I'm gonna show you my stray that I keep in my garage. I don't keep her in my garage. She's free to go whenever she wants. But my stray cat Goldie, she's the mother to a lot of these little babies. Not this one though. How cute! This is the cutest cat in the world. She's if you look at some of the past videos, she was like runty, or like she had an extremely big head. Poor thing. Here, let me bite my finger. She had an extremely big head with a little tiny body, but now she's kind of like grown up, and she looks more like a cat now. So she's not as cute as she used to be, but still cute. Let me see if I can show you guys my stray cat Goldie. Daniel Koroyu, how you doing, my friend? I hope I didn't butcher your name. Let me see if I can see my stray cat Goldie. But again, I mean, in spite of the fact that I work with cats and whatnot, and I catch a lot of flack with the cat community, because I actually work with people within the cat community to get cats fixed, whatever have you. In spite of the fact that, and a lot of those people are single cat ladies. Goldie, hey Goldie. Let me see. Cheers. That's the lady of the garage. Hi Goldie. She don't let me pet her either. I pet her one time though. But that's Good night, Goldie. Sorry guys. I'm giving you guys a tour of the Foul Player cat operation. That's my little baby cat Heaven. Hey baby. But that's about it. I mean, again, I mean, if you guys have come here in relation to my cat videos, oh, Romania, nice, my friend. If you guys have come here for in relation to a lot of my cat videos, I mean, fantastic. But in terms of like my political stuff, don't think I'm a bleeding heart liberal or come here and get offended by any of that stuff because I mean, in spite of the fact that I'm a currently conservative, um, you know, that doesn't mean my heart's all set on strictly politics and whatnot. But this channel is going to be mostly politics. All right, to Daniel Koroyu, I hope I said your name wrong, my Romanian brother. And to the other people that came through, Deuce Times, Bruce Gas, Boxing Jaw, Attack and more. Also, my brother Mark Nash, please subscribe to him as well. To anybody that showed up in the live, much love. Come back tomorrow and then we'll do this all over. But with that, I wish you guys a good night. Peace.